Danny Boyle. Himesh Patel. Richard Curtis. Welcome.
Very nice to be here. Thanks for being here, all of you.
Looking forward to talking with you. I've got a few questions, and we'll take some questions from the audience shortly. There are a few different topics I want to explore with this film, but I want to maybe start with your lead actor. And congratulations, Himesh.
Thank you.
Terrific performance. What a discovery for us. But I would love to know how maybe as a starting point, tell me how the three of you came together. Tell me about how you found each other, and tell me about the first conversations you had about this movie.
Well, the first time we met, I won't ever forget the first time we met. No, it was my first. I'd sent off a tape, and then I was in New York actually when I taped for it, and then I came back to London, and I met Danny and Richard at the Jerwood space in London, and I was terrified, obviously, but I had to prepare 3 scenes from the script and a couple of songs. So I think we did the scenes first, didn't we?
Which scenes were they? Do you remember?
Which scenes were they? I think one of them was the scene, the big secret scene that no one's allowed to tell anyone about, and the other one was Let It Be, was it?
Yeah, it'd be the comedy scene and
Leave
then
It
an
Be.
Ellie scene. And
Yeah, there would have been an Ellie scene. Oh no, it was the Latitude scene, Don't Give Up scene, yeah. Anyway, and we had a fun time. Then I sang Yesterday, by which point apparently you were sick of Yesterday. So then I sang Back in the USSR, and I think you both quite liked that one, I think, yeah.
Well, we decided randomly to give the part to the person who wore the whitest shoes to the audition, and that's why you got it, just to say.
I haven't changed my clothes since.
So, in all seriousness, tell us about what stood out in the scenes, in the songs.
Yeah, what's interesting is it's such a wonderful idea. When Richard's script arrived, it was such a glorious idea. You don't really think about the consequences is that your film is going to be based around someone singing 15 to 17 Beatles songs, but not by the Beatles, by someone else, which seems like a wonderful prospect, except that when you start to get people in to audition, you begin to think, oh my God, if this doesn't work, if you don't get the right person who can actually make you listen to the songs anew, you're going to be dead, really. And we started seeing, it thins out very, very quickly, because it's not like horse riding or, or sword fencing, which actors tell you, oh yeah, I can do that. No problem. And actually, they've never been on a horse in their life. But if they get the part, they'll go and try it. They have to come in and actually sing and play with a guitar. And we saw lots and lots of people who were much better than Himesh at singing and playing. Honestly, they were. But they
weren't available.
But they had...
What do you mean by that?
No, I do mean something very serious by it, is that it was... Because I'd begun to have a small kernel of fear that this idea wouldn't work, of having somebody do the Beatles on their own for 15 and 17 songs. It wasn't very developed then, but it was there. And then he came in and he sang, and it was like Yesterday. He sang Yesterday, which we were sick of by then, because everybody chooses it, because it's quite simple to master quickly and very touching. But he sang in it, it was like, I had this reaction like it was his song. And then the rational part of your brain is going, no, it's not, it's Paul McCartney's song. So that duality is perfect for this role. And then he sang USSR, and I was bouncing around, which you're not meant to do as a director in an audition. You're meant to stay behind the desk or whatever. But and I thought, and it had soul, really. And we hadn't seen that quality in anyone else so far, really.
Yeah, there was a lot of jazz hands. A lot of feeling that people had been to stage school and also, or that they wanted to be a pop star. And I think what we got was a really sort of humble, true, interesting, complicated version of the songs. And then also Himesh did the funny as well, which tends to knock out about 50% of British actors.
Himesh, in fairness, give us the other half of that story. Tell us the story from your perspective now. Tell me about how you prepared for that presentation, that audition, and also how did you feel about how it went? Or did you feel like you were connecting, or did you hit your
I
marks
prepared mostly in New York. Actually, I was in New York, as I say, when I taped. So when I found out that I was going back to London one day early to meet Danny and Richard, I basically spent what was meant to be a 7-day holiday with my girlfriend. Wound up being, can you run lines with me, and does this sound any good? And so I was just preparing. I borrowed my friend Steph's guitar, and I spent hours every day preparing. And then I went to London, and yeah, what's helped me through this entire process really has been Danny and Richard's. I mean, personalities are just the kind of people they never made me feel pressured. I never felt any sense of who these two are, who are two of our, greatest filmmakers. It now feels weird saying it in front of them, having gotten to know them over the last 18 months, because they immediately put me at ease. The minute I walked into the room, I didn't feel like I was in the presence of people who are particularly aware of their own, importance within our industry. They really made me feel comfortable, and that really helped the whole situation. So as much as I was bricking it a bit, it was a really fun experience, and especially when Danny started dancing around to back in the USSR, it was gratifying to the point of me leaving that first audition going, whatever happens now, and I'm sure everyone under the sun is putting their hat into the ring for this one, I had fun and we had a good time. So to now be here doing all this is kind of crazy, but yeah, felt good to begin with.
Congratulations. In that process, Danny and Richard, and as you're talking, help us understand, give us a window into that casting process and maybe the challenge you were facing in trying to cast this role, but also how do you know when you've sort of found that right person? What was it that you talked about, the way he interpreted the songs, but I mean, what was it that clicked with you?
I didn't really know at the time. You kind of have an instinctive feeling, and I've only really had it once before with Kelly MacDonald in Trainspotting, who was the young girl in Trainspotting, where they come into the room and they do something and you just think that's them. I can't explain it. The studio won't be pleased because they were looking for somebody with a bit of a name, and although Himesh was on a TV show in Britain at the time, EastEnders, it didn't really mean anything to Universal in Los Angeles, and the film was expensive because the Beatles songs cost a lot of money. So, but that's the person, and you go with that. And it's only subsequently when we worked on the film, and especially when we worked on the songs, that what's extraordinary about the songs, I think, is that they are the most joyful songs they could ever be, but there's a kind of sub-note of melancholy in them always. Somewhere in them is all the lonely people, or she's leaving home, or there's just a line that's full of longing and loneliness and tenderness and melancholy, and I think Himesh has that quality, or finds that quality in the songs, connects with that quality in the songs, and it was that quality because he's very funny, very dry. So the comedy stuff, like Richard said, no problem. Got on wonderfully with Lily. They made a wonderful pair together, working together, and then he had this connection with the songs. And the danger for a director is the technical process of filmmaking ruins it, because they want you to record the sound beforehand and sing it, to playback, mime it to playback, and all that kind of stuff, which I didn't want to do. And everything you've heard tonight is Himesh live. and the playing and the piano and the guitar is all him live. It's all live recordings. And because they vary, which is why they want you to record it beforehand, because takes vary in tempo minutely, you can't mix them. So that limits you going between takes. But we accepted all those restrictions in order to commit to a live performance because it had this soul in it that we were never going to find anywhere else, really. So we were blessed, really.
And you're shooting it with multiple cameras then, so you can have the...
So that you've got 2 or 3 choices within a particular performance of one of the songs. Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let me take a couple of steps back, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about sort of where this ingenious concept came from. Danny's already talked about sort of into the process, thinking, is this really can we pull this off? But Richard and Danny, maybe tell us a little bit about how you started talking about this.
Well, it was a strange one for me because I was rung up by a friend of mine who said, I've got this script which is based on, and he gave me the 1-sentence pitch. There's an unsuccessful musician who wakes up to find he's the only person who's can remember the Beatles. And I said, I'm so passionate about the Beatles, and that sounds interesting to me, and can you not tell me anything else? Because I'd like to just write it from here. So slightly like Himesh's character, I feel I'm here under false pretenses. So I took it on from there. I was passionate about the Beatles when I was 7, and I'm passionate about the Beatles now I'm 62. I'm so looking forward to going to the Isle of Wight on my 64th birthday, which I will definitely do. And so, I developed the story from there, wrote the script, and then by some kind of divine chance, the day I finished it, Danny wrote to me about something completely different and then said, would you be, if you've got anything in your bottom drawer, do send it to me, because I'm free for a week or two. And then I sent him the script unwillingly, and he can take it. Not unwillingly because I knew he'd reject it. That was the reason, not because I didn't want him to direct it. Well, you can take it on from there.
And Danny, you just go out to people fishing for next projects?
No. I just wrote it out of politeness. I said, I didn't mean it. Oh, yeah, I know. I didn't mean him to send me anything. I thought I'd just say it. And he said, well, funnily enough, here's a script. And it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. You have those moments where you just, you know that you should just do it. And you say, you don't talk to agents or think any of that stuff about budgets or... you don't even think.
There was no pause for you?
No. You don't think, will you ever get an actor who could do this, which you should reasonably do because it's very difficult to ask someone to do all that. You just commit to it, and we'll solve everything once we get going. And they're the best decisions you ever make, those passionate ones, and then everything unfolds from there. And It was a kind of like it was a summer that we spent in Suffolk, which is kind of in the east of England, and they all come from. Ed Sheeran's from Suffolk, and he's not very far from Suffolk, and Richard lives in Suffolk as well. So it was a wonderful combination, really.
In fact, the film is sort of about Ed. He happens to be in it because Chris Martin wasn't free. But Ed was raised just where all of that film was shot, and he played on every corner. I remember him playing at the Ipswich Agricultural Fair. And but the lovely thing about Ed is he's a adorable man, nicer than portrayed in the movie. And he became very famous, gone all the way around the world, but he's just married a girl he was at school with, and he still lives in Framlingham. So in many ways, while I was writing the film, because a friend of mine, I was thinking about Ed and the sort of choices and the priorities that he's made, which I admire him for, and I strongly believe in them to stay at home and marry a girl he went to school with. Although I must admit I failed to do that because Tracy N. Thompson, I gave her a ring when I was 7, which I'd stolen from my mum, and I remember her throwing it out the window in the snow in Sweden. And my best friend was Tracy N. Thompson's brother, Greg, who I didn't like. I was only friends with Greg because Tracy was his sister. Maybe I deserved my fate.
Anyway, we did offer the part to Chris Martin first, and he couldn't do it because he said he was too busy. So that's when Richard wrote that devastating joke about "fix you," and we moved on to Ed Sheeran. Although when we went to Ed Sheeran, we lied, of course, and said, "Ed, you're our first choice. Will you do it?" And he said, "No, I'm not. You've already offered it to Chris Martin." So on the pop stars Facebook world, the private pages they operate, it clearly goes round a bit. And he said, "And you've offered it to Harry Styles as well, I hear." And that was absolutely not true. We had not offered it to Harry Styles, even though he was very good in the Chris Nolan movie. And fortunately, Ed did it. And it seems extraordinary now when we look back. So much of it, of Himesh's journey, as Richard said, mirrors Ed's journey in a way, that it was bizarre that we should have ever thought of Chris Martin in the first place. So
I remember I asked Ed round to meet Danny, and he hadn't done his research, and so he knew Danny had made Trainspotting and Slumdog. And then halfway through the meal, he Googled him, I remember, on his phone. And he looked at me and went, "The beach?" I went, "Yeah." 28 days later. I went, "Yeah." And he realized that he had seen all of Danny's films, and it would be worth learning to act in order to be in the movie.
Hey Dude, where did that come from?
Do you know, it's my one regret in the film that we should have had Ed also suggest that the chorus should be yes, 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 yes at the end instead of na, 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 na. I'm so cross we didn't think of that at the time. I think it must have just been a silly joke. When I'm writing, I do joke days where I've sort of written the film and then I go back and just try and make it more stupid. And that obviously, that came out on one of those days.
Well, the one thing we haven't addressed yet, although you referenced it for a second about the cost that would be in the cost entailed in it, but the cooperation of the Beatles, getting access to that library, those songs, what kind of conversations were those, and how challenging?
Well, they were all had by Working Title, the producers of the film Working Title, who are probably the largest, certainly the most successful production company in Britain. Our only mini studio, really, although they work very closely with Universal here. Had done this deal whereby we could get access and use of 15 to 18 of the songs from the catalogue, but that was it. It didn't say we didn't have to nominate the songs. They could be the famous ones or the less known ones, and that which gave us a wonderful freedom in the preparing of the film, the shooting, and even in the editing. And we changed some of the songs quite late on, and it was wonderful to have that flexibility. But yes, they have to, obviously, they monitor the use of their songs very carefully so that they're not misused in, re-election presidential campaigns or anything like that.
If the movie had been about a serial killer who was very fond of the Beatles, they probably would have said no quite early in the process, but they kind of tracked it bit by bit. I think the only advice we were given was to keep it was this sort of thing. They would say, try and keep the balance between Paul and John songs and things like that. Just a little bit of nudging from time to time.
Himesh, did you get a voice in what songs would ultimately be chosen, and which ones were you most excited to sing? Which ones were most daunting, if any?
I mean, I don't think I had any say overtly, whether I played any early on and you went, well, we can't have that in the movie. I don't know if that happened. But I was kind of intimidated by the whole thing, really, to begin with. But then, I was well supported throughout by some brilliant people. I was always really looking forward to Long and Winding Road. But namely because it was one of those I was really intimidated by when I realised I had to do that one, and it was a moment in the movie, so I couldn't, there was no fudging it. And I sat down at the piano, and I had, this wonderful guy, Ardem Ilhan, who's a musician. He came in and worked with me for about 2 months and kind of helped me through that one, and I got it, eventually in my own way, because that's all this is really, is me doing it in my own kind of way, and ultimately, I guess, Jack's own way, and that's kind of what our versions of the songs are. But yeah, we had a lovely day shooting that Russia, party sequence, and then I really love how it's ended up in the movie. It's a really tender moment, not just because of the song, but of course we're also then seeing the Russian man kind of realizing his own part in the story, and so it's been a real journey with that song. Actually, it's been a long and winding road with that song. It's it's been one that I was really looking forward to, and I love doing it, and I love where it is now.
I really responded to the version of Help, which I saw and then watched again tonight. But were there versions that you tried one way and then went back and said, that's just not the way I want to do it, Danny, I want to go some, or vice versa, that you said, let's try it a whole different way?
Well, we had a version, didn't we, early on? So initially, it was just me in this room with Ardem, with Daniel, and then Danny would come in and give us notes and that kind of thing. And Help was just one of those that I just figured out the chords and I knew how to play it. And then we got a band together, because of course we knew that this was going to be one that we were doing with a band. And we got them in and we rehearsed it, and I just kind of did it best I could. And Danny saw it, and you were like, no, this has to be different. You wanted it to be a bit punkier.
Yeah, that was terrible, that moment, because it was, what you get is obviously the Himesh is an actor who can wonderfully for us sing and play as well. But when you surround you with the musicians who are musicians, they tend to want to come into the space. This is one of the dangers of the project. And we had this, and it's the only moment I was quite angry about the session musicians, the backing band, not their fault at all, but were dominating him, whereas I'm obsessed with him. I'm not interested, I wasn't interested in them. I was like, and I was like angry that they were, and so we began to come up with the idea of it being a punk version, and it was wonderful. Obviously, what's feeding into it, whether you know it or not, is that John, in writing the song, it was a cry for help, and punk, the anger of punk, the cry of punk, is a wonderful source for that. And that was one of the few times where we stepped away from the Beatles versions to do sort of what you'd normally call our own versions. But because it synthesizes beautifully with where he is as a character at that moment, and if you are a Beatles aficionado, you'd realize, yes, of course, that's what John always wanted the song to sound like. And because anyway, punk, they slagged off everybody, didn't they? But they never slagged off the Beatles. Because in a way, punk grew, like so much else, grew out of the Beatles in a way, or could touch on it, really. And so it was a wonderful way of doing it. And that was the town that we were based in, and we appealed to them, to the local people, where they'd come on that afternoon for us. And 6,428 of them turned up, these people. And then when they heard it was a punk version, they just bounced around, punked it around, and it was the most amazing occasion for us all, and it's the largest crowd cast call in the history of Britain, in Britain. Unfortunately, the world record is held by Gandhi's funeral in Richard Attenborough's Gandhi, when 1 million people turned up for that crowd call. So we were a long way short of that, but there you go.
Let me give our audience a chance to ask a couple of questions. I know it's getting late, but we'll just get a couple questions in. And we've got a microphone. We're going to go right into the center of the audience, right there. Hi.
Did you guys have any reservations about the John Lennon scene?
Well, it's very interesting. We particularly with comedies, you want to test them to see whether or not things that you hope would be funny, and other things like that. And one of the questions they ask is this what are your 5 favorite scenes, and what are your least favorite scenes? And it was interesting that scene appeared on both. We didn't have any reservations about it. I sometimes suspect it was the sort of Lynch moment for Danny wanting to do the film, because it's sort of strangest moment in the film. But we wouldn't have cut it anyway, but the people who liked it did outweigh the other ones. But we always knew it was a complicated moment. But in movies, you want to be daring once in a while.
Oh, no, I didn't. Though I could understand why people would, and we were very careful in the way the scene was played, and who we cast in it, and that it was done with great tenderness and affection, because obviously it is something that should be a triumph for movies, that a movie can do that for a moment. And you know, when we walk back out into this city tonight, that he won't be there. But for us, for 2 hours, or for, you know, the few minutes that he is there, and that's a triumph of imagination over violence and horror and all those things that can happen, really. So, no, for me, it was a wondrous moment in the script, and that I was determined to make sure that we did and try to do properly. We'd love you not to pass that on to anyone, whatever you feel about it, because obviously it's one of those things that unfolds upon you in a very interesting way, and to be respectful to everyone, affects people in different ways, I think, understandably, yeah.
It's really two significant moments upon which the movie rests, and they're really told through Himesh's face. The moment early on when he's coming to realize what world he lives in, and then the moment he has this interaction with this other person, and just sort of watching how you process each of those moments, and realizing what important moments of suspension of belief, and that's what movies are often, they are, right? And that's what really is, I think, what can be really moving about the experience of watching the film too.
I think those two moments you're singling out, that first moment when he's Googling frantically and everything, from that moment, I think Jack gives his mind to this situation, and then he's just got his mind on it. You know, his heart is out of the equation for the rest of the movie until he gets to that moment where he knocks on the door and he sees the person behind the door. And I think at that point his heart returns to the story. And I think that's kind of, for me, that moment is one of those moments where you give your heart to the story, or maybe you don't. But I think it is one of those moments where it's all about heart.
I'll put. Let's take a couple more questions, and raise your hand high. I see someone here. It's hard for me to see to the back if you have a question. Okay. Yes.
Hi, I was wondering if you would talk a little more about your decision to end the movie without ever shifting the universe back, and just sort of ending sort of like in the status quo.
Actually, I mean, one, we didn't want to be too much like Dallas. So much of my work has been based on Dallas, but I think that, but it never actually occurred to us to do that, actually. I mean, I never thought that would be something that we'd do. And in fact, my favorite scene in the movie is one that I didn't write, which is the final scene of Obladi Oblada, which was just sort of watching how things have changed back, and how he's almost back where he was at the beginning, you know, and just teaching, which he said he didn't want to have to go back to, and married and with the kids and everything like that. It never occurred to us, really. I think if it had occurred to me, I wouldn't have liked the idea, but it always seemed to me the world just had changed.
I think this might be our last one, so make it a good one.
Thank
No
you.
pressure.
I hope now I have to live up to the expectation. Bravo, this is an honor to be here. So I guess this would be for Mr. Curtis, mostly. When you were writing the script, and there was certain emotions that did come up a lot throughout the film, were there any inspirations for something like Damn Yankees, where you sort of, you know, we all think of this as like an act of God, where it was a miracle for you to become a rock star, but in actuality, it's sort of like selling your soul to the devil, because you have everything, but you really have nothing in this movie, because these are not your songs, and you really start to see that pain come through, that you're sort of lying to everybody. I was just wondering if any of those undertones, aside from the Ed Sheeran story, came through.
Well, we did talk a lot about imposter syndrome. You know, that is something that I think everybody feels in their lives. I had a lot of times on the film when I was trying to convince Danny that a scene would actually be funny, and then I would go away thinking, will it be funny? I hope so. So, you know, I think you all still feel doubts from day to day, and that's one of the things I feel like an imposter being a father. You know, there's a job I haven't trained for and I'm not doing too well at. So I think that was one of the themes that it was very much about. And then the other one is just the choice in how you spend your life, you know. And I think one of the things this film is also about is love versus work, which I suspect we all think about a lot of the time, and how you make that decision. And this is just an epic version of that, you know. Does he focus on the most important thing in his life, or in this case, something that's less important because it is based on a lie? Do you feel like an imposter, Himesh?
Every day.
Danny, can you relate to that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You always feel like you're going to be found out. You always feel like somebody's going to walk in and denounce you as being a fraud and a charlatan, really. I think it's partly because we borrow so much anyway as part of the process. I think it's probably, I don't think you're allowed to in music because obviously they have that law, don't they, where if it's more than 5 notes in the same order, then it's a court case. Yeah. But in film it isn't, is it? Because we steal all the time from other people and other things, and because it's a medley, everybody seems to forgive it. But you're always worried that you'll get found out, really, I suppose. Yeah.
In fact, I was just reading a book about the Beatles the other day, and they said it twice. They said without Chuck Berry, there's no Beatles. And I think they also said the same about Elvis. Without Elvis, there's no Beatles. It always comes a shock when you go back to those early albums that there are 6 or 7 covers in all of that. So I think even at the beginning they felt, well, we are writing some songs, but we better put some good songs on the album too, you know. So I think maybe even they felt that.
Well, last question, it's really a softball, just because I'm curious. What's something each of you are working on now that you can share with us or tell us what you're up to these days, besides getting this movie out into the world?
I'm currently working on the new Armando Iannucci series for HBO called Avenue 5 with Hugh Laurie and Josh Gad and lots of brilliant actors, so that's keeping me busy.
I'm working on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. That's my job at the moment, seeing if we can sort out climate and poverty.
Thank you for that.
I'm chasing the life rights of a story, but we haven't got them yet, so I can't tell you what it is because the price will go up.
Good luck. To the 3 of you, congratulations, and thank you very much for being here with us
Thank
tonight.
you.
Thank you so
Danny,
much.
Himesh,
Thank you very
Richard.
much.
Thank you.